Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw 2 boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats, so they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken, and so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him.
Thank you, Pam. You were very astute in saying that. I had not written my sermon at the time that I wrote the worship script. I write that on Mondays. The sermon comes later in the week, sometimes Saturday night in the wee hours. The Central Intelligence Agency last Tuesday became the first major national security agency to offer so-called buyouts to its entire workforce. The offer told federal employees that they could quit their jobs and receive roughly 8 months of pay and benefits. Widespread layoffs among the federal workforce were expected. Since last Tuesday, of course, numerous lawsuits have been filed, and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen to these employees across the government who did not accept the deferred resignation offer. If you've ever been in a similar situation, then you know what it feels like to experience the risk of a sudden change of vocation. It's especially difficult for those in midlife to change their life's work. Now, some do it to become more marketable, I suppose, but others switch vocations because they sense a pull to a higher calling. That's what happens in today's text. Jesus gives Simon an opportunity to make a fantastic return on an earlier failed attempt. Jesus says, "Put out into deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Of course, this makes no sense to Simon and his fishing buddies. They've worked all night and they've caught nothing. And yet Simon obeys Jesus when it makes no sense and hauls in a huge catch of fish. And that's not the strangest thing in this story. The strangest thing is what happens next. Simon pulls his boat full of fish ashore and walks away from it. He leaves his livelihood behind. He drops his net and follows Jesus. And this drastic vocational change isn't thrust upon him. He chooses it of his own volition. Now, why would anyone respond to an invitation to give up their livelihood? Luke's gospel is full of examples of people willing to pay the cost of discipleship. In Luke 9:23, Jesus says, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." So today's encounter between Jesus and Simon reveals that discipleship is risky business. Sometimes it involves trusting, as Sindel had sung about with Kate and John. even trusting even when what is being asked of us makes no logical sense in the moment. Clearly, obedience to divine power does have its blessings. Simon is so overwhelmed by the abundance of fish that he drops to his knees, humbly acknowledging the presence and power of God. "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man," is what comes off his lips. Have you ever been in the presence of somebody famous? Someone who just makes you go, "Oh, whoa." It's a pretty cool feeling. That can do a number on you, though. It can do a number on your self-esteem, right? Who am I, for example, to approach a celebrity in the parking lot of our church who's bringing her child to Montessori? Who am I to go up there and approach her and say, "I enjoyed your book, and it's nice to meet you," and her husband was standing right there, met him too. Who am I? I'll be honest with you, I did it. It was fun. But the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, unworthy. Unworthy. I hear the same nagging voice every time I step on the bathroom scale lately. I am determined to carve out time this year for regular exercise. Some of you are trying to help me lose weight. Thank you. Most of you are subtle with your efforts, which I appreciate. For instance, I had a delicious dinner recently in the home of a lovely church couple. And instead of doing it family style, which I'm accustomed to, where you got the big deal there of mashed potatoes and you can just keep going back for seconds and thirds. That's the way I grew up anyway. Instead of that, they put a moderate portion of food on my plate, left all the rest of the food in the kitchen. It was delicious. I ate it all. And no seconds were offered to me. When they noticed that my plate was empty, they said, "We have dessert, and it's sugar-free." I tried to enjoy the sugar-free ice cream, but all the while nagging in the back of my mind was unworthy. Unworthy. Years ago, I was invited to a party at the home of Doug and Maria DeVos. They're the only billionaire acquaintances in my life right now. And I remember pulling up to their estate in my humble Toyota Camry. Up until that moment in my life, I respected and loved and appreciated my Toyota Camry. And then I pulled up next to all the other cars that were worth likely more than my home. And uncomfortably, I walked in to join the party. They were gracious hosts, but I left early. I just did not feel worthy among them. What's up with that? Now multiply that unworthy feeling exponentially, and we might have just a taste, just a sense of what Simon is feeling in today's text as he stands in the very presence of Jesus Christ. Unworthy. This is what comes out of his mouth. "Go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man." Now, Simon was fine up until that point. But in the presence of Jesus, wow. At this point, Jesus speaks again with words of assurance. Hey, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people. What's going on with this? I think Luke is using a common literary device. Big catch of fish, right? Big catch of fish, symbolizing what's going to happen as the multitudes of people experience Jesus and begin to follow. There'll be a big catch because of his teachings and his love. Somehow Simon overcomes his sense of being unworthy. He drops everything to follow Jesus. And it leaves us asking, why? Is it the authority of Jesus that enables him to sort of lean into the discomfort and move past all that unworthiness? doesn't really say. We're left to try to figure it out. Maybe it's the love and the acceptance that Simon feels that prompts his faithful response. Simon doesn't necessarily understand all the details of what it means to say, "Come and follow me," and yet he's willing to trust. To trust and follow in the moment. And he's not the only one, right? I mean, Simon's fishing partners, James and John, and we're told all who were with him, leave everything and follow Jesus. So what's the takeaway here? Is Luke equating discipleship with abandoning our families, our friends, our financial security? I doubt it. More than likely, this is another example of Luke using a common literary device that Jesus uses all the time: hyperbole, exaggeration, right? Why? To emphasize the undeniable truth that to follow Christ, to be a disciple, involves sacrifice. Oftentimes we don't know what we're getting ourselves into when we respond to God's call. The last thing I think that today's gospel writer would want for us is to hear in this Bible story a message that would prompt us to conclude that we're unworthy to follow Jesus because we're not willing to abandon our families, to abandon our spouses, although a few of you are suspiciously eager to probably make that sacrifice. I know. But Luke would be extremely disappointed if our takeaway from today's text is, unless you're willing to abandon your family, unless you're willing to abandon your financial security, you are not worthy to follow Jesus. Wrong message. Please don't hear that. Some of the most faithful followers of Jesus Christ that I know are committed to family members, and they are also very obedient and repentant and humble and beautiful when it comes to responding to the call of God in their lives. They continue to make a persistent and fearless response to God's call, and they do so without having to renounce everything of value in their life. Likewise, I think it would be a mistake to interpret today's text concluding that in order to be a true disciple of Jesus Christ, you cannot keep your current secular job, whether that's in the seafood industry or not. No, you can keep your church work, your non-church work job. Of course you can. Faithful discipleship makes ordinary work, though, a vehicle, if we're receptive to it. Our jobs out there in the real workaday world can be the very vehicle God uses to share the love of God with our coworkers. Our faith shows, after all, wherever we are, whether we're near or far from our family, whether we have the same old job or whether we get a new job. It's true that many of our key lay leaders here at MBCC are retired. Arguably, they have more discretionary time to devote to the ministry when they're not gallivanting around the world on their many journeys, which I envy. However, we also have working people with full-time jobs, raising several children, who are also serving God in meaningful ways, both on our campus and off, right in the middle, right in the thick and thin of life. They're also saying yes to the call. So regardless of your present circumstances, all of you, I would argue, have a role to play in the ministry of our church. And by the way, our mission is not to catch people. Let's be clear about that. I want to go on record for that. That's an unfortunate common misunderstanding of Luke's gospel. Our goal is not to gather dead fish, metaphorically speaking. I mean, we're all about engaging fully alive human beings that we want to keep fully alive, right? We want to help them, all people that engage our church. We want them to become better versions of themselves as a result of engaging here in our beautiful church family. Unfortunately, the metaphor of fishing for people leaves us with images of, flapping and writhing creatures that are gasping for oxygen. Nothing could be farther from our purpose. We are about people living the life of the good news in all its fullness. And when we do that, our church family is inviting, it's beautiful, it's winsome, it's attractive, it's contagious. It's what I felt yesterday in the beautiful memorial service where we had chairs along the sides. It was so packed, and the whole balcony was full. And there was love in this place. People want to be a part of that. They want to be a part of what we have, and what we have is Christ-centered community rooted in love. So besides catching people, is really not even the accurate Greek translation, the phrase catching people or fishing for people. A more accurate understanding is that Simon has been called to join Jesus in saving people alive. That's literally what we're to understand. That's the purpose, right? Saving people alive for the kingdom. That's a very different image than catching them as if they're food to consume. Although I've been to some churches where, man, it feels like that's what they're after. Oh, fresh meat, Our boards and committees exist fundamentally to support the mission of our church, which according to the revised version that you'll be voting on today, is to create inclusive community, foster spiritual growth, and transform the world through acts of service and justice. That's our mission. Thankfully, it doesn't entail netting writhing creatures before they die in our possession. This Sunday, we say thank you to 20 church members who obeyed the call to serve God by serving on a board or committee this past year or more. Today is their last official day of service in that capacity. So I want to ask you to please stand if your board term ends today. Would you go ahead and stand, you faithful servants? And let's thank God for those going off the board. I'll have you note that they're still breathing. They might be battle-weary and in need of a well-deserved break, but nobody's flapping for oxygen like a deprived tilapia. Likewise, we have 12 church members who have obeyed the call to serve. They are listed on our 2025 board slate. And if you're on that slate or plan to be nominated from the floor today, would you please stand so we can thank God for your faithfulness in responding to God's call? Thanks for leaving your boats to follow Jesus. There really are just sort of two basic ways to follow Jesus that I've seen in my almost 40 years of ministry. One is to remain unconverted. To remain unconverted, but following after Jesus. It might entail embracing some new religious practices that are sincere, and it might involve following Jesus in this way that sort of doesn't allow for any change in your paradigm. No change in your goals. Never becoming really aware of your egoic self. And when you're not aware of your egoic self, you can have ideas of God or religion or the church that gets challenged. It challenges your ego. Oh my goodness, ego loves to be offended. Loves to be offended. That's one way of following Jesus, where your ego, you never become quite aware of your egoic self and that your essence is who you are, not your ego. And so when these things get challenged, your ideas, your long-held beliefs get challenged in a new, fresh way, your ego will likely rush to defend and block any possible enlightenment. That's one way of following Jesus. However, there's a better way to follow Jesus, in my opinion, and it involves the transformation, the renewing of our minds, an open-mindedness. It's a transformation of our consciousness, our worldview, our motivation, our goals. It's becoming fully aware of our egoic selves, which often get us into trouble. And this is conversion. And this is what happens to Simon in today's text. He chooses right then and there on his knees, despite his feelings of unworthiness, to die to self and live for Christ. Now, this concept is almost impossible to grasp when we're young and invincible. The idea of death is far removed from us. I sent Rob Barber a little video clip of a guy who thought himself invincible, right? Going down that snow, that mountain that was just like this, right in between two rocks. And he made it through somehow, but he could have died easily. But you remember when you were young and invincible, right? This idea of having to die to self and live for Christ, it's almost impossible for a preacher, no matter how we try, to get it across. However, something happens that's beautiful when we get older. The truth starts sinking in. The truth that dying is a part of life. All you have to do is look at our bulletin and the insert there, and it's obvious, right? Dying is a part of life. And by our 50s and 60s, hopefully we've learned that dying isn't opposed to life. It's part of a greater mystery. Choir will be singing about this mystery coming up in a future service. And we're all part of that mystery. There's no escaping it. So no matter how old we are, the choice is always before us. We can choose to go deeper in our faith, or we can stay in our boats, certain that we know all that we need to know. We've grown all that we need to grow. We've been transformed fully, and don't even need to be humble about it. Or we can drop to our knees in humility and openly follow Jesus without having all the answers. The call of God on our lives comes to each of us in a variety of ways. We don't always choose the moments when God shows up, right? I mean, God chooses us. For some, it comes in foxholes, the foxholes of life, literally or metaphorically. And for others, it comes in moments that are overwhelming to us because there's just such a clear, present awareness of God's holiness in that moment. It's undeniable. However and whenever it comes, don't be surprised if you have more questions than answers. Don't be surprised if it entails sacrifice, but also blessing. Don't be surprised if, like Simon, you feel unworthy. Oh, I couldn't do that. You want me to serve in what way? Oh, no, I could never do that. Don't be surprised if that's the first thing that pops in your head when you're asked to serve here. God can work with that humility. God can work with that attitude. Look, friends, we get to do this for the time that we have together. We get to do this. We get to leave our boats and partner with God to create inclusive community, foster spiritual growth, and transform the world through acts of service and justice. Amen.